Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled Stormwatch Beacon, the Heartbeat of Raven's Cove. Maris opened her eyes before the first fingers of sunlight pierced the sky. An odd hush draped itself over the coastal town of Port Avalon, as though the world was holding its breath in anticipation. From her window, she could see the gleaming harbor waters, dark and still, broken only by the slow rise of morning mist. Today was the day she had longed for, a private pilgrimage to the old lighthouse that stood sentinel at the mouth of Raven's Cove. They called it Stormwatch Beacon, but to Maris it was something more, a place where the past and present blended, where every crashing wave carried secrets she was eager to uncover. She stretched languidly, feeling the silk sheet slip beneath her skin, and breathed deeply. The air smelled of salt and the faint tang of wild elderberries blooming just beyond her cottage. She reached for her journal on the bedside table, a tattered leather notebook, its pages already full of sketches and half-formed impressions of the lighthouse. Today, she would fill those pages with new discoveries. A soft knock sounded at her door. Maris turned and saw Rowan standing there, his auburn hair catching the pale dawn light like embers. He carried 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. "I thought you might like something warm before you leave," he said, stepping inside. "Thank you," Maris replied, taking the cup and blowing gently on its surface. "I can't wait to get out there." Her eyes gleamed with excitement. Rowan offered her a small smile. He'd known her since childhood, always the steady anchor to her restless spirit. "Just remember," he cautioned, "the rocks can be slippery, and the wind off the cove is unpredictable. Dress warmly." Maris nodded, taking another sip. The tea's floral sweetness grounded her. "I know. I'll be careful." After a quick breakfast of crusty bread and honey, Maris gathered her gear, a sturdy canvas backpack, leather-bound journal, charcoal pencils, and a compact handheld lantern. She slipped into her favorite wool coat, emerald green, with brass buttons that caught the light, and laced her boots snugly. By the time she stepped onto the dew-damp cobblestones of the main street, the sun was just waking, painting the sky in pale lavender and rose. As she walked toward the harbor, Maris passed the familiar sights, the old bakery with its driftwood sign dangling in the breeze, the fisherman's pier where nets lay coiled like sleeping serpents, and clusters of seaside cottages with smoke curling from their chimneys. The world felt unhurried here, as if time itself moved to the rhythm of the tides. At the edge of town, she found a narrow path that led to Raven's Cove, a winding trail bordered by marsh grasses and low, thorny brambles. The scent of salt intensified with each step. In the distance, she could just make out the silhouette of Stormwatch Beacon, its squat, cylindrical tower rising from the craggy breakwater like an ancient guardian. Maris quickened her pace. As she emerged onto the granite causeway, the expanse of the bay opened before her, glassy water reflecting shards of early light, sailboats bobbing gently, and, beyond, the fishing village of gulls. Haven clinging to its rocky shore. The causeway itself stretched for nearly 3/4 of a mile. Hewn stone blocks laid one atop another, a path built by stoic hands decades before. Legend said over 300 shipwrecks had occurred within sight of this very spot, others whispered of ghosts lingering among the boulders. Maris felt a thrill of anticipation. She stepped onto the stones, her boots clicking on the hard surface. A cool breeze swept in from the sea, tugging at her coat and ruffling her hair. She paused, closed her eyes, and listened. Gull cries overhead, the murmur of distant conversation, the gentle sigh of waves slipping under the breakwater. She exhaled slowly, letting the world's rhythm synchronize with her own. Halfway along the causeway, Maris spotted a cluster of rugosa roses clinging to the cracks between stones. Their delicate pink blooms stood in stark contrast to the gray granite. She knelt to examine them, tracing a petal with her fingertip. Rowan's warning echoed in her mind: nothing here was entirely tranquil. Yet these roses, thriving in defiance of salt spray and sharp wind, seemed to embody resilience. She sketched a quick study in her journal and moved on. Further along, she noticed a gleaming, shell-strewn nook where a young boy and his father crouched, examining tide pools. Clutching a small net, the boy pointed excitedly at a bright blue starfish nestled among the rocks. Maris smiled at their discovery, her own childhood curiosity mirrored in the boy's wonder. She made a mental note to capture that scene later, in words or sketches. A low, rumbling sound drew her gaze seaward, where a lone seal basked on an outcropping of rock, its dark eyes watching her cautiously. She stood perfectly still, careful not to startle it, and watched as it dipped its head below the waves. It surfaced moments later, then slipped away with effortless grace. Maris felt a pang of envy at the seal's freedom, then settled on a small ledge to record the encounter. By now, the causeway was alive with movement, fishermen unloading baskets of fresh catch, a pair of elderly women strolling arm in arm, a trio of artists setting up portable easels. Maris admired how each person brought their own story to this shared walkway. She scribbled notes: community of the causeway, each traveler a chapter. These words would guide her later when she wove her narrative. Just as she neared the end of the breakwater, the lighthouse itself came into full view. Stormwatch beacon stood proud and weathered, its whitewashed walls marred by salt and time, a bright red lantern room perched atop a slender column of brick and stone. A spiral staircase wound up inside, its metal steps grooved with decades of footsteps. At its base, an old mahogany door bore a brass plaque engraved with the date 1903. Maris felt her heart quicken. She rose and approached the door, trailing her fingers over the worn wood. She paused to read the plaque, letting it anchor her to the history. Then she placed her hand on the cool metal handle only to hesitate. A sudden gust of wind lashed the cliff, sending a spray of salty droplets across her face. She blinked, tasted brine on her lips, and realized the island was waking. It was as if the lighthouse itself had sensed her arrival. Gathering her courage, Maris gripped the handle firmly and pushed. The door swung inward with a creak that echoed like a secret being revealed. Inside, A narrow corridor led to the heart of the beacon. Soft morning light filtered through small portholes, illuminating motes of dust dancing like fireflies. The air smelled of old oil and varnish. Maris stepped inside, her footsteps muffled on the worn stone floor. Above her, the spiral staircase waited, promising further mysteries. She set down her bag and knelt to unwrap the lantern she had brought, a delicate, brass-caged lamp meant to illuminate her journal entries later tonight. She placed it carefully on a wooden shelf beside a stack of faded logbooks. Maris ran her hand over the spines, some bound in green leather, others in deep crimson, each one a silent chronicle of keepers long gone. Taking a deep breath, Maris reached for the topmost logbook and opened it. The first page bore a neat handwritten entry dated July 14, 1903, first lighting of the beacon. A stormy night, yet the light held through the gale. She smiled, feeling the continuum of keepers past guiding her own journey. She dipped her pen into ink and began to write. I stand here now, in the wan light of dawn, to add my voice to these pages. May my words carry the hush of Raven's Cove, the laughter of explorers, and the memory of every soul who has walked this path before me. Outside, the sound of the sea grew louder, the wind howled through the windows, and Maris's heart resonated with the rhythm of the waves. Episode 1 had begun. Maris closed the logbook gently and rose to her feet, her eyes adjusting to the muted light that filtered through the portholes. The narrow chamber around her felt sacred walls streaked with salt, the low hum of the sea vibrating through the floor. She lifted the brass-caged lantern from the shelf and struck a match, the small flame leaping to life with a fragile glow. Carefully, she set the lamp on a worn marble plinth that supported the great Fresnel lens, its concentric prisms refracting the lantern's light into rainbow shards dancing on the curved glass. She inhaled deeply, the scent of oil and old paper mingling with a hint of frosted seaweed that the wind had carried inside. Each prism seemed like a tiny window to another century, capturing the whispers of keepers past. Maris ran her fingers over the cool metal framework, imagining the painstaking care required to polish each glass ring by hand. Historians said that the Fresnel lens, prized for its ability to project light farther than any earlier design, was once considered a marvel of modern engineering. Yet here, in this lonely room, its power felt almost magical. Determined to uncover more, Maris fetched a screwdriver from her pack and removed the small access panel at the base of the lens. Inside lay a hollow cavity lined with copper gears and oil-stained bearings. She leaned in, peering closely at the mechanism. A faded brass plaque nearby read, "Mechanism serviced by Leonard Hawthorne, Keeper Number 7, 1948. Maris paused and closed her eyes, picturing Leonard in his heavy navy uniform, oiling gears in the glow of lamplight, listening to the wind battering the tower. She reattached the panel and scribbled a note in her journal, sketching the gear layout and jotting Leonard's name with a small star beside it. "The hands that keep this light alive," she wrote, "are the same that guided countless sailors safely home." The thought made her heart swell with reverence. A sudden gust rattled the portholes, and a sharp knock echoed from the door below. Maris started, her pen slipping as she reacted. The sound was unexpected, the breakwater was usually deserted this early. Gathering her courage, she set down her journal and lantern and climbed the narrow steel stairs leading to the walkway that encircled the lantern room. Outside, the wind lashed against her coat, whipping her hair around her face. Gray clouds scudded overhead, their undersides bruised with oncoming rain. Yet below, on the causeway, she spotted a solitary figure approaching, tall, bundled in a dark waterproof jacket, stride purposeful. Maris watched as the visitor climbed the steep path, each step determined despite the spray blowing off the waves. Her pulse quickened. She should have known Rowan would check on her, but he never ventured this far. This stranger's gait felt different, urgent, as though driven by a weighty purpose. Maris hesitated, then shouted, "Hello." "Wait." Her voice was swallowed by the wind, but the figure paused, raising a gloved hand. Maris rushed down the stairs, skirting the lens carefully, and opened the lantern room door. The visitor lifted her hood. Maris gasped, recognizing the angular cheekbones and dark eyes that mirrored her own. "You?" she stammered. How did you?" The woman offered a brief, knowing smile. "I expected you," she said, her voice calm against the storm's roar. "I'm Aurora." She extended a gloved hand. Maris stared at it, thunder rolling in the distance. Aurora's coat was adorned with a small silver brooch shaped like a feathered wing, an emblem Maris had seen in one of the dusty log books, marking the original founders of the Stormwatch Keepers Guild. Maris swallowed hard. "Aurora Kingsley," she whispered. "Your name is in the records." Aurora nodded. "My great-grandfather, Elias Kingsley, was the first to argue for the lighthouse's preservation when the Coast Guard sought automation. He fought to keep a human presence here until the very end. I've come to honor that legacy and perhaps to ask your help." Maris's heart pounded. She glanced back toward the lens room. The lamp flickered in her hand. The storm had turned this pilgrimage into something larger, an invitation to join Aurora on a mission that bridged past and present. She realized that her solitary journey had grown into a shared quest. "Tell me," Maris said, stepping closer, "what exactly do I need to do?" Aurora's eyes shone with a quiet intensity. "There's a sealed chamber beneath the tower," she explained, "where Elias documented a final experiment, an experimental signal device he believed could guide ships even through the thickest fog. No one's seen it in decades because the hatch was welded shut. We need to open it before the storm reaches its peak tonight, or the signal will never be heard." Maris felt a thrill of excitement. The idea of uncovering a hidden invention, rediscovered after a century, was exactly the kind of secret she lived for. She nodded decisively. "Let's find that hatch." Together, they descended the spiral staircase to the ground floor, where Aurora located an iron ring embedded in the thick concrete floor. Cobwebs clung to its edges. Maris knelt and ran her fingers around the seam. "This must be it," she said. She produced a small handsaw and began to work, while Aurora held the lantern low, its beam cutting through the dim. They pried loose metal shards and scraped away years of rust. Outside, the wind howled, and the sky darkened, fat drops of rain beginning to patter on the roof. Each scrape of metal echoed like a beckoning call. After nearly 20 minutes of careful work, the ring gave way with a metallic groan. Maris and Aurora exchanged triumphant glances. Aurora grasped the ring and pulled. The heavy hatch rose, revealing a steep ladder descending into pitch black. A chill wind exhaled from the opening, carrying the scent of damp earth and machinery. Maris clicked on a headlamp she wore on her coat and led the way down the ladder, Aurora close behind. They landed in a small underground chamber no larger than a closet, its walls lined with crude shelves holding glass vials, coils of copper wire, and handwritten diagrams pinned to the plaster. In the center stood a battered wooden crate, its lid held shut by iron clasps engraved with Elias's initials. Maris reverently pried them open. Inside lay a tarnished brass apparatus, a compact, horn-shaped transmitter connected to a bundle of wires, a clockwork timer still wound, and a leather-bound notebook with leather straps undone. Maris lifted the notebook carefully. The pages inside were yellowed but legible. The first entry read, August 3, 1922. The foghorn transmitter, designed to emit a coded tone pattern intelligible to mariners, even when sight and standard fog signals fail. Only a few trials remain. She swallowed, imagining Elias painstakingly recording each test, hopeful that this device would prevent yet one more tragedy on Raven's Cove. Aurora shone her light on the apparatus. "We have to restore power and test the transmitter tonight," she said softly. "Before the storm cuts off all access." Maris nodded, awe and determination burning in her chest. "Then we'd best get to work." She opened her pack and began unpacking tools borrowed from the harbor workshop: spare batteries, wrenches, and a portable generator. Aurora cleared space on the damp floor, laying out the manuals and diagrams. Outside, the wind rose to a roar, as if urging them on. As they worked side by side, Maris felt a thrilling sense of purpose blend with reverence for those who came before. The chamber beneath the lighthouse, forgotten for almost 100 years, was now alive again, its secrets on the brink of revelation. And though thunder rattled the masonry above, neither woman paused. They were keepers now, entrusted with an inheritance of light and hope, racing against the storm to ensure that the beacon of Stormwatch would shine in more ways than one. The seconds ticked by, tools clinking and paper rustling, until at last the generator sputtered, coughed, and roared to life. Maris tightened a final bolt on the transmitter's frame. She exchanged a glance with Aurora. Both women felt the weight and promise of history in their hands. Maris pressed a key on the device. A low hum resonated through the chamber, followed by a series of melodic pulses, an otherworldly sequence that seemed to vibrate in the very stone walls. She closed her eyes, listening as the pattern repeated, growing clearer. Outside, a distant ship's horn answered in kind, a deep echo that filled the night air. Aurora's smile was almost luminous in the headlamp's glow. "It works," she breathed. Elias was right. Maris exhaled in relief, joy, and awe. The storm couldn't break them now. They had summoned a new signal to pierce the darkness, an echo of the past guiding mariners toward safety. In that moment, the lighthouse was more than a silent monument. It was alive, its legacy rekindled by two determined souls who understood that light, whether from a flame or a song, is meant to be shared. And somewhere in the swirling mist above, Stormwatch beacon stood watch once more, its story rewritten by those who dared to listen. Maris awoke to the sound of distant waves pounding against the breakwater, their rhythmic fury like a drum beat heralding the storm's full wrath. Rain lashed the iron portholes, each drop a tiny percussion on the glass. She lay for a moment in the lantern room's soft glow, recalling the triumph of the night before, the transmitter's melodic pulses echoing across the cove, the distant ship's horn answering like a grateful heart. Yet now, with the storm reaching its crescendo, the lighthouse itself felt alive in a different way, groaning under gusts, shuddering as the wind searched for weak points in its aged stone. Pulling on her woolen coat and sturdy boots, Maris climbed the spiral stairs to the watch platform. The railing was cold and slippery. She wrapped her hands around it, peering into the mist-choked darkness. Lightning forked overhead, illuminating the angry ocean in stark relief, whitecaps like shattered shards of glass hurling toward her. The wind tugged at her hair, threatening to rip the lantern from her hands. Yet beneath her, the beacon stood solid, a testament to every keeper who had stood guard here through decades of tempests. Aurora emerged behind her, eyes bright despite exhaustion. She wore a thick navy sweater and a weatherproof vest, her dark braids tucked into her jacket. "It's worse than I anticipated," she shouted against the roar. But the transmitter kept sending its signal all night. The Coast Guard confirmed that two freighters adjusted course thanks to the coded pulses. They faced the worst of the gale but made port safely this morning. Maris exhaled, relief mingling with fatigue. "That's incredible. Elias would be proud." She placed a hand on the cool metal lantern, feeling its steady warmth. "We gave this place new purpose." Aurora nodded, but her gaze drifted beyond the railing to the distant horizon, where the sea and sky merged in a haze of driving rain. "I should have told you sooner," she said softly. "My family's ties to Stormwatch go deeper than I let on." Elias didn't just design the transmitter, he believed the lighthouse itself was key to a ley line, a channel of unseen energy flowing beneath the earth. He swore that in the storm's eye, the tower could resonate with the cove and amplify any signal broadcast from within. That's why he insisted on a keeper's presence. Human intention, he thought, completed the circuit. Maris frowned, curiosity sharpening her senses. "A ley line? You mean like, mystical?" "The science didn't mention that." Aurora glanced at her, eyes gleaming with conviction. "He called it the heartbeat of Raven's Cove. He charted it in his journals, maps of underground currents, diagrams of magnetic fields tied to coastal rock formations. He spent years trying to align the Fresnel lens during supercell storms, hoping the storm's energy would feed back into the signal device. He believed that with the right resonance, the lighthouse could broadcast not only light and sound but a kind of reassurance, something sailors could feel as well as hear." Maris shivered, partly from the cold wind, partly from a thrill she couldn't suppress. The intersection of myth and mechanics reminded her of the lacework of stories she loved to untangle. "Do you think it's true?" she shouted, turning her face into the gale. Aurora's expression grew serious. "I nearly dismissed it as fanciful. That was before I found Elias's final journal entry." She reached into her coat and withdrew a small, weathered notebook bound in oilskin. The cover bore a sketch of the lighthouse encircled by spiraling lines. "Listen to this," Aurora said, flipping it open. September 17, 1922. A storm of unprecedented scale approaches. I can feel the pulse beneath my feet. If Maris and I can align the transmitter at the moment the storm's eye passes, we may harness the Cove's heartbeat and broadcast a beacon of hope stronger than any light or horn. Tonight, I become part of this place. Thunder cracked like a whip. Maris could almost feel the ground trembling in response. She took the journal and read that line again, the words "I become part of this place" resonating deep within her. He believed it, she murmured. He actually thought he could join with the lighthouse and the sea. Aurora's eyes glowed. "That's what I want to try tonight with you." Maris hesitated only for a heartbeat. The rational part of her mind balked at the notion of ley lines and mystical resonance. Yet the part of her that lived for possibility, that believed stories held power beyond logic, stirred to life. She nodded. "All right. Show me where." Together, they descended back into the transmitter chamber, the stairwell rocking like a ship's hull. Maris tightened her grip on the handrail. At the bottom, Aurora unstrapped the oilskin journal, spreading its pages on a wooden table. Underneath lay a circular diagram of interlocking rings labeled with compass bearings and phases of the moon. At the center, a symbol resembling a heartbeat, two arcs converging at a point. Aurora traced a finger along one arc. "See this? It maps the angle of approach for storms coming from the northeast. Tonight's storm aligns almost perfectly with the chart. If we adjust the transmitter's horn to the angle indicated and activate it at the exact moment the storm's eye is over the beacon." Maris exhaled, excitement and apprehension twisting together. "We risk shutting it down entirely if the resonance misfires." Aurora looked up, conviction unwavering. "Or we amplify it tenfold. We have one chance." They set to work. Maris retrieved the transmitter's horn, now mounted on a swivel bracket. Aurora consulted the oilskin journal, adjusting the dial to precisely 37. 5 degrees northeast, the angle Elias had noted. Maris secured the mount and tightened the calibration screws, her fingers slick with oil and rainwater that dripped from her coat. All the while, the generator's churning hum provided a steady pulse beneath their feet, almost like a heartbeat itself. Outside, the wind crescendoed as the storm's eye approached. Maris glanced at the analog clock on the wall, 8:17 p.m. According to the journal, the eye would pass overhead at 8:30. They had 13 minutes. Aurora wound the transmitter's clockwork timer, its springs humming softly. Ready? She asked. Maris nodded, shoulder brushing Aurora's in a moment of solidarity. Ready. They climbed back up to the lantern room, passing through the narrow corridor where Maris had first encountered Aurora. Now, that corridor felt like a threshold between worlds, one of everyday reality, the other of potential transformation. They emerged onto the platform just as the rain slackened for an uneasy lull. The wind still roared, but in that moment of calm, the first hint of the storm's eye flickered on the horizon, a circular patch of relative stillness, a gray void in the swirling chaos. Maris closed her eyes and inhaled the charged air. She could almost taste the electrical crackle on her tongue. When the clock struck 8:30, Aurora flipped a switch on the transmitter at their feet. A low, resonant chord filled the night, rich and sonorous, vibrating through the stone tower like a tangible wave. Maris felt it in her chest, a deep thrum matching her own heartbeat. Around them, the wind fell away, the rain stilled, leaving only the echo of the device and the faint susurration of the sea. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. Then, as if waking from a dream, the storm's fury returned, but something was different. The wind no longer sought to batter the lighthouse, it swirled around it in graceful spirals, a protective vortex. Lightning arced in distant sheets, but the tower remained unshaken, anchored by its own resonance. Maris opened her eyes. She could see the entire cove spread out before her in the brief calm of the storm's heart. Every ship in the bay lay motionless, as if held in a cradle of air. Above, the Fresnel lens refracted lightning into ghostly rainbows across the swirling clouds, an aurora of sea and sky. With the storm's eye centered, Maris realized that this was more than myth. In this moment, the lighthouse, the storm, and themselves had become a single circuit of energy. She reached out and placed her palm on the cool metal railing, feeling the pulse beneath it, a living force older than any recorded history. Aurora stood beside her, silent awe etched on her face. Then, as the storm's eye began to move on, Maris knew they had achieved something extraordinary. They had tapped into the very heartbeat of Raven's Cove, weaving their own lives into the lighthouse's legacy. When the wind picked up again, returning with renewed intensity, Maris felt no fear. Instead, she felt a profound sense of belonging, to this place, to the women and men who had tended its light, and to the unspoken promise that as long as keepers stood watch, Stormwatch Beacon would endure, guiding, protecting, and inspiring all who dared to listen. And as the lighthouse's horn joined the wind in a final harmonized chord, Maris whispered into the gale, "We are one," sealing their pact with the storm. When Maris awoke the next morning, the world felt unsteady, as though the earth itself was settling after last night's grand performance. She peered through the lantern room's portholes and saw the breakwater slick with rain, sea water pooling in shadowed crevices. The horizon glowed with the soft promise of dawn, pale gold bleeding into rose and lavender. Maris dressed quickly, pulling on layers to ward off the damp chill, and made her way down the spiral stairs to find Aurora awaiting her in the transmitter chamber. Aurora looked tired but bright-eyed, her dark braid unraveled and curling damply around her face. Moonlight still lingered in the undusted corners of the room, and the air smelled of seaweed and oil. The heavy hatch beside the crate remained open, revealing the ladder that led up to where they had tested the transmitter. Glass shards from the Fresnel lens refracted the morning sun into fractured rainbows dancing across the floorboards. "Morning," Aurora whispered, offering Maris a mug of strong coffee brewed in a battered percolator they had rigged to the generator. Maris accepted it gratefully, savoring the bitter warmth. They stood side by side, listening to the low hum of the machine, an echo of last night's success. "We did something remarkable," Maris said softly, swirling the coffee in her mug. "The storm's eye, the resonance, it all came together." Aurora nodded, but her expression held something more, concern tempered by determination. "I've been thinking," she replied. "The transmitter saved lives, but it also altered the energy around the lighthouse. The generators and gears survived, but the harmonic feedback last night may have shifted the ley lines again. We need to survey the tower's foundations, check for any fractures or weak points." Maris set down her mug and squared her shoulders. "You're right. Let's assemble the survey equipment." She opened her pack and retrieved a handheld seismograph, a small digital device that measured ground vibrations, along with a laser level and maps of the breakwater's geology. Aurora spread the maps across the crate's lid, marking the locations of underlying bedrock seams and the original granite seams from the causeway's construction. The two women spent the next hour placing sensors in strategic spots, at the breakwater's base, halfway along the granite path, and inside the tower's foundation chamber where the old keepers once housed their stores. In the dim light of dawn, with raindrops still tapping the windows, they calibrated the instruments and activated the seismograph to record any sign of structural stress. As the data scrolled across the small LCD screen, Maris held her breath. Each line represented a vibration, a pulse from the earth. The numbers hovered within safe parameters, no alarming spikes. Relief washed over her. She exhaled and looked at Aurora, whose face broke into a wide grin. "The tower held," Aurora said. "We didn't break it with our ambitions." Maris laughed, the tension melting away. "But we may have awakened something else." She tapped the map where the gravest fractures lay dormant under centuries of granite. "Last night's resonance may have realigned the currents beneath us. That could explain why we felt the heartbeat so strongly." Aurora's eyes flashed with excitement. "If that's true, we could chart the ley line's new course and use it to guide vessels through Raven's Cove in more ways than light or sound. Imagine a subtle field pulsing beneath the waves, gently steering ships toward safety." Maris's gaze drifted to the maps, tracing lines that intersected beneath churning water and solid stone. "We need more data," she said. "We should expand our survey, take readings along the shoreline, in the harbor, even on the seabed if we can." Aurora's brow furrowed. "The Coast Guard might help with that, but they'll need convincing." She leaned in, whispers of storm-swept salt clinging to her voice. "I've already spoken to Lieutenant Harper. He's intrigued but cautious. He wants proof." Maris nodded. "Then we'll give him proof. Let's prepare a report: maps, seismograph data, transmitter logs, journal excerpts. She smiled at the slender parcel of oilskin journal entries still tucked in Aurora's coat pocket. And we'll show him Elias's vision, too. By midday, the skies had cleared, revealing the battered beauty of Port Avalon. Trees drooped with weighted branches, cottages wore sheets of drying laundry fluttering in the breeze, and dock workers in bright rain gear unloaded crates of fish and lobster traps, their laughter and shouts punctuating the quiet hum of machinery. Maris and Aurora stood at the edge of the harbor, surveying Mount Whitcomb's reflection in the calm water. Lieutenant Harper, a steely-eyed man with salt and pepper hair and a crisply starched uniform, approached them with a clipboard under his arm. "Good afternoon, ladies," he said, tipping his cap. "Aurora, I've reviewed your preliminary reports. You've certainly stirred up some unconventional claims about this lighthouse. Mind if I see the data?" Aurora glanced at Maris, who nodded encouragingly. Together, they led him to the base of the tower and pointed out the sensor nodes still humming with power. Harper peered at the seismograph display, eyebrows arching as he twisted the device to read the logs. Maris handed him a neatly bound folder containing diagrams, seismic charts, and excerpts from Elias's journal, including the passages about the heartbeat of Raven's Cove. Harper flipped through them, brow furrowing deeper with each page. "This is quite detailed," he murmured. "It's not often we see someone revive century-old archives for coastal safety." He looked up, measuring her sincerity. "You're proposing that beneath the lighthouse is a network of energy lines that respond to both natural forces and human intention." "Exactly," Aurora said. "And last night's controlled resonance demonstrated it. The transmitter broadcast last night's pulses fed back into the ley lines, creating a protective conduit around the breakwater." Harper tapped his pen against his chin. "In practical terms, what's the benefit? Beyond preventing structural damage, how does this help navigation?" Maris stepped forward, her voice clear. "If we chart the energy nodes and their connections under the cove, we can set up a series of low-frequency signal buoys along the shoreline. These buoys would resonate with the ley line, creating a subtle magnetic corridor guiding ships. Mariners would feel a slight correction on their compasses, pointing them away from hazards toward safe channels even in thick fog or electronic failure." Harper's gaze shifted to the water, imagining ships gliding through an invisible corridor. He scratched his beard thoughtfully. "That could save a lot of lives and cargo. But to deploy such buoys, we'd need specialized equipment and funding." Aurora smiled. "I have contacts in the Keepers Guild willing to invest in coastal preservation projects. They just need your endorsement." Harper closed the folder and tucked it under his arm. "I'll support a pilot program, on one condition: you help modernize the lighthouse's automation system so a small team can maintain it remotely. If we're going to tie it into a larger network, we need reliable controls." Maris exchanged a glance with Aurora. "We can handle that," she said. "Between the transmitter's electronics and some programmable relays, we can build a remote interface." I've done similar work for small weather stations. Harper nodded, satisfaction settling on his features. Very well. I'll initiate the paperwork and allocate a small budget. Let's see where this goes. He extended his hand, and both women shook it, sealing a partnership that would transform Stormwatch Beacon from a solitary tower into the hub of an interconnected safety network. That afternoon, as Maris and Aurora returned to the transmitter chamber, the golden light of late afternoon slanted through portholes, illuminating dust motes that danced like floating confetti. They set their plans in motion. Maris sketched circuit diagrams for the automation upgrades, while Aurora reviewed funding proposals and coordinated with the Keepers Guild via satellite phone. By evening, the tower hummed with renewed purpose. Maris tested a prototype relay that could adjust the transmitter's output based on remote commands. The Fresnel lens above caught the final rays of sun, splitting them into rainbow spectrums that arced across the chamber walls. Aurora pinned updated maps to the crate lid, tracing planned buoy locations with a fine-tipped pen. Maris paused and looked at Aurora. We've come so far from a simple pilgrimage to the brink of a technological revolution. She smiled, the soft glow of accomplishment warming her features. I never imagined our journey would lead here. Aurora returned the smile. It only proves that when we honor the past and listen to its whispers, we can build a brighter future. Maris tapped the seismograph's green indicator light. And the heartbeat of Raven's Cove will guide us all. Outside, as twilight fell, the lighthouse's silhouette stood firm against the star-pricked sky. In its depths, two keepers, one by blood, the other by choice, made ready to shepherd its next chapter, ensuring that Stormwatch Beacon remained a living legacy of light, resonance, and unwavering hope. Maris stirred before dawn, the faint hum of the generator echoing through the lantern room like a heartbeat guiding her awake. She dressed quickly in waterproof layers, thermal undergarments, stiff-soled boots, and a hooded anorak that bore the emblem of the Keepers Guild stitched in silver thread. Today, they would deploy the first pair of Resonance Buoys prototype devices designed to tap into Raven's Cove's ley lines and create an invisible safety corridor for incoming vessels. Aurora waited in the transmitter chamber, her cheeks pink from a quick jog up the spiral staircase. She held two slender crates, each fitted with custom gaskets to protect their delicate electronics from salt spray. A third crate, larger and heavier, contained the buoy anchor's solid copper weights forged by local blacksmiths and engraved with the Cove's map coordinates. Ready? Aurora asked, her voice bright despite the chilly air. Maris nodded, running her gloved fingers over the schematic taped to the side of one crate. Let's make history. They descended to the breakwater's base, where Lieutenant Harper and two Coast Guard technicians stood beside the service boat, its engine idling in the still, gray water. Dawn's first light carved sharp silhouettes out of pilings and crates, painting the sky in muted pastels. Harper greeted them with a curt nod. Time's tight. The tide turns in an hour. We need buoys in the water before slack. Aurora handed him a tablet displaying the buoy's GPS coordinates and activation codes. We've configured them to resonate at the optimal frequency 15 Hz, matching the Cove's lowest harmonic. Once anchored, they'll broadcast a magnetic signal that interacts with the transmitter's pulses from the tower. Harper studied the tablet. Understood. I'll have my crew lower them. He glanced at Maris. How long until you can sync with Stormwatch beacon? Maris knelt by the crate and flicked a switch on its control panel. Tiny LEDs blinked in sequence. Just a few adjustments. We'll run a calibration sequence from the lantern room. You'll see the buoys light up like fireflies at range. The technicians hoisted the copper anchors over the boat's rail, each dangling from a heavy-duty cable attached to a winch. Maris and Aurora watched, breath clouding in the cold air as the boat drifted away, carrying the crate strapped to its deck. Within minutes, the service boat reached the first marker buoy, a simple white float painted with a single red band. One technician guided a crane arm to lower the first copper anchor straight down. The anchor hit the seabed with a dull thud. A moment later, the technician pressed a button on a console, and the corresponding LED on the buoy's control box blinked green. Back on the breakwater, Maris tapped a key on her handheld console. A screen lit up with telemetry, depth 22 feet, signal strength 87%, resonance frequency locked at 15.02 Hz. She grinned. Buoy 1 is online. Aurora exhaled in relief. Signal strong. Now for buoy 2. They repeated the sequence at a second buoy, anchoring it deeper 38 feet below the surface, nestled against an outcrop of submerged granite. When that LED blinked green, Maris watched the telemetry spike to 92%. Excellent, she called, voice trembling with excitement. Both boys locked in. Lieutenant Harper, clipboard in hand, nodded. Looks good. Let's get back to the beacon for calibration. The service boat returned to the breakwater's landing platform. Maris and Aurora boarded, hauling the remaining empty crates. Harper invited Maris to sit by the helm, the consoles glowing dimly in the early light. Aurora joined him at the navigation station. They cruised out into the channel, the rising sun gilding rolling swells as gannets swooped overhead. Once they were directly beneath Stormwatch beacon, Maris switched on the tablet's uplink module. Underwater cables strung from the tower's base connected directly to the transmitter's control panel. Through the tablet, she accessed the buoy's network and began the synchronization protocol, a precise sequence of amplitude and phase adjustments designed to align the buoy's magnetic fields with the tower's harmonic resonance. As the protocol initiated, the water around them pulsed faintly, a subtle thrum Maris could almost feel through her boots. She closed her eyes, imagining the unseen currents weaving between stone and sea. In her mind, she traced the path, from the copper anchors, through the bay's bedrock, up the brittle cracks beneath the lighthouse, and back into the brass gearwork of the transmitter. A soft chime from the tablet indicated success. Maris opened her eyes to see the telemetry confirm perfect phase lock. Aurora let out a whoop. Harper cracked a grin beneath his stern exterior. That's impressive. Let's test it with the ship. Later that morning, a fishing trawler bound for Port Avalon appeared on the horizon, its bow cutting through choppy waves. The vessel's captain, alerted by radio, adjusted course to pass between the buoys and the breakwater. Maris and Aurora watched anxiously from the boat's deck as the trawler's bow dipped between the markers. A notification pinged on the tablet, course deviation corrected, 2.3 degrees. Maris tapped the alert, pulling up a graph showing the ship's autopilot data before and after the buoy's field. The vessel's heading had suddenly nudged away from submerged rocks and toward the safety of the harbor entrance. Aurora punched the air. It works in live conditions. The captain's voice crackled over the radio. That was the smoothest approach I've ever had. Felt like something was guiding us. I'm in port now. Thanks, Stormwatch. Maris felt a shiver down her spine. She snapped a photo of the tablet's display and sent it to Harper, who let out an amused whistle. Looks like we've got a winner. By afternoon, the sea had calmed into a glassy expanse reflecting cottony clouds drifting overhead. Back on the breakwater, Maris and Aurora carried crates of spare parts toward the tower for inspection. Maris paused to kneel by the granite blocks, running her hands over the cold, salt-polished surface. She breathed in the brine-laced air, feeling the day's exhilaration blend with a deep sense of purpose. Aurora joined her, slipping a hand into Maris's. We've done more than keep the light alive. We've woven ourselves into the Cove's heartbeat. Maris smiled, squeezing Aurora's hand. This is only the beginning. She rose and brushed granite dust from her knees. Next, we refine the frequencies, deploy more buoys farther out, and gather data over different tide cycles. Then we can build a full navigational grid. Aurora grinned, eyes shining with ambition. And once we have that, Port Avalon becomes a model for coastal safety worldwide. They climbed the spiral staircase together, boots echoing on metal steps, carrying their crates full of promise. At the top, the lantern room's curved windows framed a panorama of sea and sky. The Fresnel lens caught the late afternoon sun, splitting it into dancing prisms that swept across the chamber floor like living rainbows, tokens of the light they had reignited and the magnetic paths they now commanded. Maris settled behind the transmitter controls, fingers poised above switches and dials. Aurora retrieved a fresh logbook and began to write. August 12, 2025. Today, we anchored the first resonance buoys beneath Raven's Cove. The lighthouse's heart now pulses beyond its walls, guiding ships with an unseen hand. May this network grow until every coastline holds a guardian's promise. Maris read the entry and nodded. Perfect. She activated the transmitter on its low-power test mode, and a soft hum filled the room. The prisms glowed with muted color, as though the rainbow itself had become a conduit of sound and signal. Outside, the lighthouse's horn issued its daily call, and gulls wheeled overhead, their cries carried on the warm breeze. Maris and Aurora exchanged a look of quiet triumph, two keepers who had taken an ancient sentinel and transformed it into a living, breathing nexus of protection and innovation. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in molten gold, Maris whispered, "To Stormwatch beacon and to the keepers who will follow us." Aurora closed the log book, sealing their oath against the crackling twilight. Below them, the copper anchors lay in silent vigil, their unseen fields weaving threads of safety through dark waters. And within the tower's heart, the transmitter glowed like a watchful eye, ever ready to pulse with the Cove's eternal heartbeat. The morning light filtered through heavy clouds as Maris stood at the edge of the breakwater, eyes fixed on the buoy field glinting in the swell. Though the buoy's LED indicators still pulsed a steady green, their gentle hum, carried on electromagnetic waves beneath the waves, seemed almost too quiet after yesterday's triumph. The storm had passed, but new challenges beckoned, rippling through Port Avalon like undercurrents of tension. Aurora emerged from the lighthouse door, her boots crunching on wet granite. She carried a satchel brimming with freshly printed data sheets and geospatial charts, their margins scrawled with notations in her neat, looping handwriting. "Lieutenant Harper wants a full report by tomorrow morning," she called, tilting her head against the wind. "He's convening a meeting with the Harbor Council. He says they're curious." Maris smiled wryly. Curious, or cautious? She clipped her portable anemometer to her belt, monitoring a sudden shift in wind speed. "This system of buoys is groundbreaking, but you know how skeptical some of the harbor masters can be. They respect tradition more than innovation." Aurora nodded, shading her eyes. "Then we'll give them proof they can't ignore. We'll run another live test with the fishing fleet at dawn, coordinate schedules, gather their feedback, and deliver the data with an emphasis on safety metrics, reduced insurance risks, fewer near misses, and smoother docking maneuvers." Maris paused, watching a lobster boat glide between the markers at dawn speed. "And what about the communities beyond Port Avalon? If the ley line grid works here, it could be extended to neighboring channels, even offshore platforms." Aurora's gaze followed the boat. "That's phase 2. For now, let's perfect our local network. Once the Harbor Council endorses the pilot, we'll pitch regional expansion." They set to work, loading sensitive instruments into Aurora's all-terrain utility truck, underwater magnetometers to map magnetic anomalies, a brine-resistant depth sounder to chart seabed contours, and a pair of remote-operated underwater drones equipped with bright strobes and manipulators. Maris double-checked the drone controls, ensuring the range boosters and encryption keys were loaded. "Last night's resonance may have shifted certain nodes," she said. "We need to remap the field to confirm the buoys remain optimally placed." Aurora snatched a clipboard from her satchel. "I've already reprocessed the seismic logs. I marked 3 spots along the western edge of the breakwater where the ley line appears to branch. If we anchor supplemental microbuoys there, we can reinforce the corridor's stability." Maris slapped the clipboard into her hand. "Then let's not waste any more time." 2 hours later, they stood on the breakwater's lower platform, the truck's engines idling nearby. The water below was a swirling mosaic of deep emerald and silt-laden currents shifting colors that hinted at hidden topography. Aurora transmitted coordinates to the Coast Guard launch, which would deploy the magnetometer tow behind its hull. Meanwhile, Maris prepped the first ROV, its polished titanium frame gleaming in the pale daylight. The drone slipped silently into the water, its propellers barely stirring the surface. Maris guided it via tethered controls, watching the live feed on her waterproof tablet. Beneath the hull of the breakwater, the camera revealed grooves in the granite where centuries-old deposits of iron-rich minerals had formed. Tiny electric fields flickered across the screen, painting the walls with ghostly waves of neon blue luminescence. "That's the primary lake conduit," Maris said, pointing. "Look at how the field strength spikes around those mineral veins." Aurora leaned in, tracing the contours on her chart. "Exactly where Elias expected. Let's mark those for microbuoy placement." They repeated the process at 2 more locations, a submerged ridge to the north where the current eddied around a cluster of barnacle-encrusted boulders, and a crevice near the lighthouse foundation, where faint electrical anomalies suggested a secondary channel. Maris toggled the drone's manipulator arm to drop small acoustic beacons at each point, their weighted bases clicking softly as they settled into crevices. By late afternoon, all supplemental nodes were tagged. Aurora downloaded the magnetometer data from the Coast Guard launch and overlaid it on Maris's field map. The result was an intricate lattice of intersecting lines, an underground network of energy streams now made visible in color-coded brilliance. Aurora tapped the screen, her finger tracing a loop near the harbor mouth. "These 3 microbuoys, combined with our original pair, form a pentagonal pattern. That'll create a stable magnetic polygon guiding vessels through the most treacherous currents." Maris's pride swelled. "And once we get approval, we can deploy them permanently and open source the coordinates for any mariner with the app we've been beta testing." She tapped her tablet. "That's phase 1 complete." But as they packed up equipment, a sudden movement at the edge of the breakwater caught Maris's eye. A lone figure in a dark hoodie stood by the water's edge, back turned. The late light of evening cast him in silhouette. She frowned. That hoodie looked familiar, too familiar. "Aurora." Maris bit out. "Do you recognize that person?" Aurora followed her gaze, brows knitting. "I don't." She turned to look, but by then the stranger had slipped behind a granite outcrop and vanished. Maris's heart raced. They had to approach the microbuoys. "Someone's been here." She tapped her tablet, checking the acoustic beacon signals. "All 5 beacons are still transmitting, but I see a brief power fluctuation on node 3 about 10 minutes ago." Aurora's jaw tightened. "That's the crevice near the tower foundation. Someone could have tampered with the anchor lines or the beacon's power pack." She rooted in her satchel and produced a handheld multispectral scanner. "We should inspect each node on foot before we leave." Maris nodded, adrenaline sharpening her senses. They descended the breakwater path toward Node 1, where the water lapped gently. Maris knelt and ran her gloved fingers around the beacon's casing. It looked undisturbed. The second was likewise pristine. But at node 3, near the lighthouse's base, the beacon's solar panel was scratched and tilted at a slight angle. A smear of oily residue caked the seal around its power port. Maris knelt and examined the smear with the scanner. It displayed traces of industrial-grade lubricant, one not used in their equipment, but common in heavy machinery like dredgers and offshore rigs. Someone knows what they're doing. Aurora's voice was tight. And it's not accidental. She fixed the beacon upright, cleaning the residue with an alcohol swab from her kit. "We'll secure it," she said, strapping a tamper-evident seal around the housing. "Then we prove to Harper and the Harbor Council that our system is robust and that any interference will be obvious." As dusk fell, the two keepers climbed back to the lighthouse, shadows lengthening across the granite walkway. Maris shivered, not from cold, but a vague sense of vulnerability. This project had drawn attention, both welcome and unwelcome. They had opened a new chapter in Port Avalon's maritime history, but now someone sought to write a different ending. Aurora placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll handle this," she promised. "We'll bring evidence to the council and ensure the boys stay safe." Maris met her gaze, determination igniting in her eyes. "And if they try it again, we'll catch them in the act." Inside the transmitter chamber, they returned to the console. Maris ran a diagnostic sweep on the telemetry logs, highlighting the exact moment of the power fluctuation. Aurora drafted an incident report, framing it as a security assessment. They locked the files behind encrypted keys and scheduled an automated backup to the Keepers Guild server. Finally, they climbed to the lantern room, the horizon alight with the glow of distant storm lanterns, ships calling Port Avalon home. Maris stood at the window, inhaling the salty air. She realized that keeping a beacon safe meant more than maintaining its mechanics. It meant standing guard against the currents of human intent, both noble and malicious. Aurora joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. Together, they watched the tiny points of light bob on the water, each one a potential voyage safeguarded by their work. Maris pressed her forehead against the cool glass. "We'll protect them all," she whispered. And as the wind sang through the Fresnel prisms, scattering light across the chamber floor, Maris and Aurora, two keepers bound by purpose, resolved to fortify the heartbeat of Raven's Cove against whatever shadows might lie on the waterline. Maris awoke to the low hum of conversation drifting up the spiral staircase, a sound so unusual in the early hours that her heart skipped a beat. She pulled on her coat and lantern, knotting its strap under her chin, then hurried down the polished metal stairs toward the source. At the base of the tower she found Aurora, huddled with Lieutenant Harper and two Harbor Council members, Marina Delacroix, the port's veteran harbor master, and Councilman Elias Trant, a sharp-suited man with a reputation for old-school pragmatism. Their faces turned as she approached. Aurora brushed a strand of damp hair from her eyes. "Good morning," she said. "We thought we'd hold an early briefing before the day's traffic begins." Maris took a steadying breath. "We have the security report ready, she said, placing a tablet into Harper's hands. He scrolled through the encrypted logs, her incident annotations, and the photos of the scratched beacon housing. Marina's eyes narrowed as she peered at the screen. "So someone tampered with our boys," Marina said, voice low. "That's reckless, and potentially dangerous." Councilman Trent folded his arms. "I've heard rumors some say your Ley Lines project is more mumbo-jumbo than modern science. If someone's trying to sabotage it, maybe they're right." Aurora's lips pressed together. "With respect, Councilman, we have hard data. The seismic logs show the ground vibrations we recorded last night. The magnetometer readings confirm the buoy's resonance field. We have testimonies from the fishing captains who felt their courses adjusted safely. This isn't mystical, it's measurable physics." Marina folded her arms. "I'm all for new technology, but Port Avalon runs on reliability. If I can't guarantee these buoys are tamper-proof, I can't justify risking lives on unproven systems." Maris stepped forward, summoning every ounce of confidence. "That's why we propose a secure monitoring station in the Lantern Room. We'll install a network of infrared cameras and motion sensors along the causeway and breakwater. Any unauthorized approach will trigger an alert. Plus, we'll reinforce every beacon with tamper-evident seals and encrypted power modules. You'll know immediately if someone even looks at them." Councilman Trent's gaze flicked to Harper. The lieutenant gave a slight nod. Trent turned back to Marina. "And who pays for these upgrades?" he asked, voice leveling. Aurora answered before Maris could. "The Keepers Guild has allocated funds for coastal safety improvements. We can cover the upfront costs and arrange for maintenance training for Coast Guard personnel." Marina exchanged a look with Trent, then sighed. "All right. I'll authorize the monitoring installation on a trial basis. But if there's a single failure, tampering, malfunction, or worse, Port Avalon withdraws support, and we dismantle the buoys." Maris bowed her head. "Understood." Harper closed the tablet. "We'll get my people on security and instrumentation right away." He motioned to Aurora and Maris. "Let's draw up the technical specs." By midday, the Lantern Room had been transformed into a makeshift control center. Aurora and Maris worked side by side with two Coast Guard electronics techs, Petty Officer Kamala Singh and Ensign Rafael Torres, laying out blueprints on folding tables and pointing out cable runs along the breakwater railings. Maris handed Kamala a roll of fiber optic line, demonstrating how to conceal it in the granite joints. Singh nodded, impressed by the precision. Torres studied the infrared camera feed on a portable monitor. "These cameras have a 120-degree field of view with night vision capability down to half a lux," he explained. "We'll mount them every 50 yards along the causeway and wire them back here. Any movement after dusk triggers an alert on this console." Aurora tapped at her tablet, logging the specs. We'll also integrate the camera alerts with the transmitter chronometer. If a tamper alert comes in, the chronometer will cut power to the boys and send the logs to the council server. Maris looked at the schematic for the tamper-evident power modules. I've configured them with dual-layer encryption, a rolling code generated by this microcontroller here, she pointed. If someone tries to open the housing, the module wipes its key and shuts down. We'll need a secure reset code from my tablet to reactivate. Ensign Torres raised an eyebrow. So if someone gets inside, they can't reset it without your cooperation? Maris nodded. Exactly. And every failed reset attempt is logged and time-stamped, with geographic coordinates based on the beacon's GPS. By late afternoon, they had a full security blueprint, complete with sensor placement, network topology, power requirements, and fail-safe protocols. Aurora drafted an executive summary for the Harbor Council, a concise overview of lessons learned, proposed measures, budget outlines, and implementation timelines. That evening, as dusk settled like ink over Raven's Cove, Maris and Aurora climbed the causeway once more, this time carrying black anodized camera housings and tamper-proof conduit. The wind had a chill, and Maris zipped her coat tight, feeling a thrill of anticipation. They paused at the first buoy, illuminated by the last pale light. Below them, the water whispered against copper anchors. Above, the Fresnel lens glowed softly in the lantern room. Aurora set a camera mount atop a granite block. Maris drilled an inconspicuous hole and fed the conduit through. She attached the housing, then crouched to secure the fiber optic cable, sealing the joint with weatherproof resin. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, but her mind soared with possibilities. Soon, any intruder's approach would be illuminated in red-hot infrared, visible only in their control feeds. They moved onto each node in turn, installing power modules with encrypted boards, sealing the units, and snapping tamper-evident tags in place. All the while, the wind grew colder, and the sky overhead compiled a host of stars, a silent audience to their work. Halfway across the causeway, Maris paused to catch her breath. She looked back at the lighthouse, its caretaker beacon bright against the night sky. For the first time, she felt the full weight of responsibility settle in her chest. Protecting this legacy meant more than technology. It meant vigilance, guardianship, and an unwavering bond of trust with every mariner who followed the light. Aurora approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Ready for the final test?" she asked. Maris nodded, smoothing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Let's see if the sensors work." Back in the lantern room, they fired up the console. The infrared monitors lit up like a grid of tiny windows, showing every stretch of causeway and breakwater. They armed the tamper alert system and stepped outside, walking along the cast iron railing while watching their own silhouettes appear in grainy black and white on the screens. At the far end of the causeway, Aurora tapped a key. The console beeped, and a red box outlined her figure. "Alert," she said, voice triumphant. "It's working." Maris let out a whoop, an unrestrained burst of joy that echoed against the granite. "Perfect. Now, If someone tries to sabotage the system, we'll know instantaneously. Aurora hugged her, the infrared camera capturing the embrace as a glowing ghost pair on screen. The wind howled approval. As they returned to the transmitter console to disarm the test alert, Maris realized how far they'd come since she first set foot on the breakwater. What began as a solitary pilgrimage had grown into a partnership of science, history, and unwavering dedication. They had thwarted sabotage, secured their experiments, and earned the Harbor Council's trust, at least, for now. Aurora switched off the console monitors and crossed to the window. "Tomorrow, we present this to the council," she said. "They'll see the system's robustness and the lengths we'll go to protect their safety." Maris joined her, placing a hand on the cold glass. The buoys glowed faintly in the water, like nocturnal lanterns guiding invisible paths. She felt their pulse through the cables and circuits, a testament to human ingenuity aligned with nature's own rhythms. "Whatever happens next," Maris whispered, "we'll face it together, keepers of the light, protectors of the Cove." Aurora smiled softly. "And nothing will stand in our way." Outside, a lone ship's horn called from the distance, answering the silent promise of Stormwatch beacon. Maris slipped quietly through the shadowed archway at the base of Stormwatch beacon, her lantern's soft glow illuminating the worn stone walls. It was well past midnight, and the harbor lay silent beneath a silver wash of moonlight. She carried nothing but a small toolkit, a coil of spare fiber optic cable, and the sense that something had gone wrong. Only hours earlier, at the Harbor Council meeting, Aurora had secured approval for the security upgrades, but now a new alert had just pinged on Maris's encrypted channel, one of the tamper evident. Beacons had triggered at 11:47 p.m. on the Western Causeway, yet the console logs showed no corresponding infrared camera activity. She crouched beside the heavy hatch leading down to the transmitter chamber, eased it open, and descended into the dimly lit corridor. At the bottom, she found Aurora bent over the console, cross-referencing sonar logs with the beacon's time-stamped alarm. "They accessed the beacon from beneath the walkway," Aurora whispered, not looking up. Her voice trembled with contained fury. "They must have used a diver or submersible to reach the node from underwater and bypass the cameras entirely." Maris set her lantern on a nearby shelf and drew her headlamp over her for it. "That explains the missing infrared record. But why tamper now after we proved the system's resilience?" Aurora shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe someone powerful wants to discredit us before Phase 2. We need to recover the beacon's data module and inspect it for forensic evidence." Maris tapped a key to cut power to the local network and powered down the console. "Lead the way." They climbed the narrow metal stairs to the breakwater's midsection, where the third microbuoy lay anchored in a rocky crevice. The lantern light glimmered on wet granite as they checked the sensor's tamper seal. It had been ripped, cable traces cut, and the power module removed. The beacon housing lay open, empty. Maris crouched and examined the seabed just below the edge of the breakwater. Moonlight splintered on the water's surface, but at knee height she could just make out a trail of footprints, shallow marks in the silt-packed granite, leading away toward the end of the causeway. She knelt and retrieved a small water-activated patch kit from her pack, carefully plugging the open cable conduit to prevent further corrosion. They approached from water level, then climbed up after cutting the housing, Maris said. She traced the footprints with a trembling finger. They're going somewhere now, probably to the next node. Aurora snapped on her headlamp and shone it down the causeway. Let's follow them before they hit another beacon. They moved swiftly but silently, boots clicking softly on the stone as they advanced toward Node 4. Maris flicked on her portable acoustic scanner, sweeping for the beacon's backup signal. The small speaker crackled with faint data pings, leading them in the right direction. Suddenly, Maris froze. Ahead, a glint of metal reflected her headlamp, an out-of-place spade, its handle smeared with wet algae. Beside it, a hastily scrawled note pinned to a loose granite slab. Stop meddling in affairs older than you. Leave Raven's Cove be. Maris swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She held the note upside down so Aurora could read it. Aurora's lips thinned, eyes flashing. This is a threat. Maris crumpled the note into her fist. We can't back down now. She glanced at the water below. They must have a small dive rig parked near the jetty. Aurora nodded. Let's finish inspecting the beacons, then report this to Harper first thing. They pressed on, arriving at Node 4 without further incident. There, too, the housing had been forced open, the power module was missing, and the lead weights lay scattered like metallic breadcrumbs. Maris took photographs with her encrypted tablet, capturing every detail, the scraped seal, chipped paint, and a faint fingerprint visible on the lubricant port adapter. Backlit by her headlamp, Aurora gingerly lifted the housing and found a single black fiber more flexible and finer than their own fiber optic cable. She bagged it in a sterile evidence pouch. DNA, trace material, this could identify them. Maris continued south, following the pinging signal toward Node 5. They passed the old half-sunken fishing skiff tied to the side of the breakwater, its hull patched with driftwood. A diver's mask and gloves lay draped over the stern. Evidently, this was the saboteurs' exit point. At Node 5, the damage was worse. The entire beacon had been torn from its mount, leaving only a cable snapped halfway. Maris pressed her gloved palm against the mount, feeling vibrations through the cable. She traced the conduit down to the water and felt a faint electric charge. Someone had jerry-rigged the cable to siphon power remotely. This isn't just sabotage, she said, voice tight. They're gathering data on our system, possibly to replicate it or to manipulate the ley line grid for their own purposes. Aurora exhaled in a low hiss. Then we have two threats, someone intent on discrediting our safety network, and someone else trying to steal the technology. Maris straightened. We need to respond, and fast. Let's secure the remaining nodes, reinforce the undamaged beacons, and deploy an emergency alert to every harbor master. Any vessel crossing between the breakwater markers after dusk will be boarded and searched. Aurora hesitated. That risks alarm and a loss of goodwill. But if the threat is real, she steeled herself. I'll draft an advisory for immediate release. Maris knelt beside Node 2. Though its housing was intact, the lens had been jammed. Saltwater droplets inside the dome indicated someone had attempted to flood the sensor. She gingerly opened the seal and drained the water, then inserted a hydrophobic membrane to prevent recurrence. All the seals need upgrading, Maris said, screwing a new module into place. She activated the beacon's self-test. It emitted a quick chirp, then returned to normal pulsing. Their Node 2 is back online. Aurora logged the repair in her tablet and sent Harper the photos, the note, and a summary of their field work. We'll need forensic teams on site by first light, she said. Maris nodded, scanning the horizon. The sky was paling with pre-dawn light, but the breakwater still lay shrouded in confusion and danger. She tapped her headlamp off. One more node to secure. At node 1, they found the final beacon scratched but still functioning. Maris replaced the power module and swapped in the newly encrypted board. As she worked, Aurora slipped away to retrieve the spade and gloves from earlier. She bagged them as evidence, careful to preserve latent prints. By the time they finished, the first rays of sun were cresting over the distant cliffs, turning the sea to liquid gold. Maris and Aurora stood at the end of the causeway, looking back at the lighthouse, its white tower gleaming in the morning light, its windows like watchful eyes. Aurora exhaled, her breath visible in the cool dawn air. We did all we could. Now we wait for Harper's team. Maris placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll get through this, together. Our grid will survive. She paused, dropping her gaze to the water where the anchors lay hidden in the depths. And the cove will remain safe. Aurora nodded. The heartbeat of Raven's Cove endures. Maris smiled, despite the exhaustion pressing at her bones. Let's head back for breakfast and strategy. We have an incident report to write, a council to brief, and a saboteur to unmask. They turned toward the lighthouse, stepping in unison along the granite causeway as the dawn chorus of gulls rose on the cool breeze. Stormwatch beacon stood behind them, silent, steadfast, and more alive than ever as a guardian of both light and hidden currents. The Harbor Council chamber smelled of polished oak and old parchment, its long, curved table bathed in the warm glow of lanterns suspended from wrought iron sconces. Maris settled into the seat beside Aurora, her heart hammering with anticipation. To their left sat Lieutenant Harper, reviewing a stack of evidence folders. Across the table, Councilman Elias Trent fingered his silvered cufflinks, and Harbor Master Marina Delacroix tapped a stylus against her notes, removing her glasses only to peering over their rims. When she spoke, Marina cleared her throat. Ladies, gentlemen, she began, voice measured. You understand the gravity of this meeting. Port Avalon's safety network is under threat from those seeking to discredit or steal its technology. We've reviewed the incident report, photographs of damaged beacons, audio logs, and the makeshift saboteur's note. Now we need solutions. Aurora and Maris, you may begin. Maris took a breath, unfolding her own leather-bound report and stacking it neatly before her. "Thank you, Master Delacroix. Councilman Trent, Lieutenant Harper, I appreciate your willingness to convene on short notice. As you know, 8 days ago we activated the resonance buoys and demonstrated their efficacy in guiding vessels through hazardous waters. Since then, we've encountered 2 distinct threats: sabotage aimed at disabling our buoys, and attempts to extract our proprietary technology." Aurora picked up an evidence folder. "We recovered this note pinned to the granite causeway," she said, sliding a copy across. "We also collected a diver's mask, gloves bearing suspect lubricant residue, and a strand of foreign fiber from a tampered beacon. Preliminary analysis suggests the fiber's polymer composition matches industrial-grade cable often used in deep-sea drilling rigs." She tapped the folder. "We believe a third party, possibly with ties to offshore resource extraction, seeks to appropriate the ley line mapping for their own purposes." Councilman Trent's jaw tightened. "Resource extraction? Are you suggesting someone wants to drill beneath the cove?" He glanced at Marina. "We can't allow that." "No," Maris said firmly. "Not drilling. But by reversing our mapping, a malicious operator could create localized feedback loops disrupting navigation, causing dangerous eddies, even harming marine life." She tapped a chart showing the ley line grid. "Our grid is more than a guide, it's a stabilizing force. In the wrong hands, it could be weaponized." Lieutenant Harper nodded. "I've spoken with my Coast Guard contacts. They've pledged additional patrols around the breakwater at dusk and dawn. But they need your consent to enforce port and search on suspicious vessels." Marina exchanged a glance with Trent. "Port and search is a significant measure. Our port welcomes fishing boats, tour skiffs, even private yachts. We risk alienating our community." Aurora leaned forward, voice calm but urgent. "We propose targeted patrols using Coast Guard ROVs equipped with thermal imaging. Any vessel loitering near buoy fields after dusk will be scanned for unregistered dive gear or cable runs. If we detect anomalies, we can conduct non-invasive visual inspections. This balances security and courtesy." Trent tapped his pen. "That seems reasonable. What about the buoys themselves? Can they be made tamper-proof beyond what we have?" Maris smiled, relief warming her. "We are already upgrading the next generation of beacons with self-sealing casings, hydrophobic membranes, and an internal gyroscope that logs unauthorized movement. Each beacon will broadcast a cryptographic heartbeat to our central console. If the frequency isn't met precisely, the beacon goes into lockdown and alerts us immediately. We expect prototypes in 2 weeks." Marina nodded. "That addresses the physical security. But what of the data you're mapping of the ley lines? Do you trust us with those details?" Aurora exchanged a glance with Maris. Then she reached into her satchel and withdrew a sealed envelope embossed with the Keeper's Guild crest. we propose a tri-party data custody arrangement. A master copy stays with the Guild archives in Port Avalon's secure vault. A second, encrypted copy will be held by the Coast Guard's engineering department. A third remains with the Harbor Council's records. Access requires concurrence of at least 2 parties. Trent frowned thoughtfully. So no single entity has sole access. Correct, Maris said. It ensures transparency and prevents misuse. Councilman Trent leaned back. I like it. And the community, how do we explain these measures to avoid panic? Aurora smiled gently. We suggest a public demonstration day. Invite local captains, charter operators, and residents to a guided tour of the lighthouse and breakwater. Show them how the buoys work, let them see the live telemetry, and even pilot a mock vessel through virtual simulations. Education builds trust. Marina exchanged a glance with Harper, who gave a subtle nod. That could actually boost local tourism, she admitted. Stormwatch experience showcasing Port Avalon's commitment to safety and innovation. Trent tapped his pen once more. All right. I motion to adopt the security measures as presented, increased patrols, enhanced beacon design, tri-party data custody, and public demonstration. Seconded. Harper raised his hand. I second it. Marina's gavel and antique navigational bell sounded like a jetty buoy's clang. Motion carries. We have a plan. Later that afternoon, Maris and Aurora stood on the breakwater's edge, watching a Coast Guard ROV drift beneath the surface, its camera lights probing the dark water where the buoys bobbed silently. The new thermal drones circled overhead, their sensors sweeping for unusual heat signatures. Maris held Aurora's hand, both of them feeling the weight of what they'd accomplished. Aurora squeezed Maris's hand. We did it. Maris nodded, eyes bright. We protected the cove and our work. She tilted her head toward the glassy sea. And now we'll show everyone how a lighthouse can be more than a tower of light, it can be the heart of an entire safety network. Aurora smiled, watching the ROV's feed on her tablet. Tomorrow, we launch the Stormwatch experience. Let's light up this town with pride. Maris lifted her gaze to the lighthouse rising above them, its white walls gleaming in the afternoon sun. To Stormwatch Beacon, she whispered, may its light and our legacy guide Port Avalon for generations to come. The wind carried her words out over the water, and all around them, the cove pulsed with unseen currents of energy, protection, and hope, an unbreakable bond between the keepers, the council, and every soul who dared to sail beneath Stormwatch's watchful glow. Port Avalon had never buzzed with such anticipation. For weeks, flyers had lined shop windows and cafe counters, heralding the inaugural Stormwatch experience, a full-day public event celebrating the town's newly upgraded maritime safety system. Curious tourists mingled with skeptical locals, all eager to see whether the mysterious heartbeat buoys and ley line networks were myth or miracle. Maris stood in front of the lighthouse's main gates, adjusting her lapel badge gold foil embossed with Stormwatch Keeper. She wore a windbreaker bearing the same insignia, matched by Aurora, who approached from the tower carrying 2 clipboards and a trail of excitement in her step. "We're at 122 confirmed attendees," Aurora grinned, passing her the guest list. Mayor Hargrove just arrived, and the Historical Society brought out artifacts from the original Keeper families. Maris let out a long, happy sigh. "All we need now is not to be sabotaged mid-demonstration." Aurora gave her a look. "We installed 3 backup systems and a mobile command unit manned by Harper's team. If someone so much as breathes near a beacon, we'll know." Maris chuckled. "All right then. Let's show them what modern keepers can do." By mid-morning, the breakwater was a mosaic of activity, a demonstration tent with screens displaying real-time buoy data, a dock where visitors could board small boats to view the submerged sensors, and a roped-off platform featuring artifacts like Elias Kingsley's original journal and an old brass foghorn. Children scrambled between tents, collecting lighthouse-themed badges in a scavenger hunt organized by the local museum. Inside the tower, visitors queued to ascend to the lantern room. There, they marveled at the massive Fresnel lens and peeked through telescopes that aligned with each buoy. An augmented reality setup allowed them to visualize the ley line network as luminous threads arcing beneath the waves. At noon, Maris took the main stage near the breakwater's edge. She stepped behind a wooden podium flanked by the town's banner and the Keepers Guild sigil. Cameras flashed. Journalists from coastal cities jotted notes, while live streams broadcast her face across tablet screens all the way to nearby harbors. "Thank you all for joining us," she began, her voice carrying over speakers. 3 months ago, Stormwatch Beacon stood as a monument of the past. Today, it stands at the crossroads of tradition and technology. She gestured to the large screen behind her, which displayed a slow animation of the ley line grid, expanding across Raven's Cove. "This system doesn't just guide ships, it listens to the sea. It reads the silent language of tides, wind, and the magnetic pull of the earth. And when something shifts, it tells us." Applause followed, and Aurora stepped up to join her. "Safety," Aurora said clearly, "doesn't begin with walls or sirens. It begins with vigilance. It begins when a community decides to protect what matters. And today, we've done just that." As cheers broke out, Mayor Hargrove approached the podium with a plaque. "On behalf of Port Avalon, we officially designate Maris Wren and Aurora Kingsley as guardians of the Cove. Let their story become a lighthouse of its own." That evening, as the crowd dispersed and the lanterns lit one by one along the granite path, Maris and Aurora returned to the transmitter chamber. They removed their name badges, setting them atop Elias's old journal, and sat by the control console, warm drinks in hand. "I never thought I'd see this day," Maris whispered. "Stormwatch, alive with purpose again." Aurora leaned against her. "And this time, we're not alone. We have the town. The council, the guild, and each other. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the transmitter's heartbeat blink steady and green. Then came a soft knock on the metal hatch. Lieutenant Harper, still in uniform. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, stepping in. "We just received an anonymous message routed through our satellite link." Maris and Aurora straightened. "Show us." He handed over a printed slip. The message was brief. "The ley lines beneath Avalon are only one thread in a larger tapestry. Others are watching. Prepare the beacon for more than just storms." Maris read the words twice, then looked at Aurora, who had gone still. "The heartbeat," she whispered, "was only the beginning." Harper frowned. "What do you want me to do?" Maris didn't answer immediately. She stood, walked to the far wall, and opened a cabinet containing Elias's original ley line maps. Carefully, she unfolded the largest one, a worn vellum sheet showing arcs that stretched far beyond the cove, tracing paths inland and out to sea. "Activate long-range scans," she said finally. "Map every anomaly, every fluctuation outside the grid. And check with the guild, see if any other lighthouses have reported similar breaches or signals." Aurora met her gaze. "If there are others, we need to find them." "And warn them," Maris said. Harper nodded and left. The hatch closed behind him with a thud. That night, Stormwatch beacon pulsed not just with light, but with readiness. Maris and Aurora stood at the lantern room's balcony, watching as one by one, the boys blinked their rhythmic signal across the water. But now, they weren't just guiding ships. They were listening for echoes from beyond Port Avalon, for other keepers who might soon need help. The sea was vast. The storm had passed. But the real current was only just beginning. Stormwatch beacon hummed with a quiet intensity as dusk crept across the waters. Maris stood alone in the lantern room, watching the final glimmers of sun melt into the ocean's edge. Below her, the resonance buoys blinked like floating constellations, each pulse a promise. But tonight, their rhythm had shifted. A subtle change, just enough to make her skin prickle. She stepped away from the window and tapped the console display. Aurora had updated the transmitter's interface that morning, integrating a new overlay to chart energy fluctuations beyond the Cove's mapped ley grid. It was elegant in its simplicity, colored threads overlaid on sonar and seismic data, but tonight, a new line had appeared. A silver thread curling inward from the open sea. Unknown. Unmapped. Alive. Unknown beacon signal detected, direction 121. 6 degrees southeast. Frequency 14. 94 Hz, the console read in small, glowing font. Maris blinked. The frequency was within resonance range, but too precise, too deliberate to be random. She adjusted the overlay, extending the radius out 30 nautical miles. The silver line traced across the map, bending ever so slightly toward the coastline, like something seeking to connect. Footsteps echoed behind her. Aurora appeared in the doorway, eyes tired but alert, a thermos of coffee cradled in her hands. "You saw it too," she said softly. Maris nodded. "It's been steady for 38 minutes. Not Coast Guard, not a civilian beacon. And it's broadcasting a structured pattern." She tapped a few keys. 3 pulses, 1 pause, 2 pulses, 1 long tone. Aurora moved closer, setting the thermos down. "That's not random. It's a pattern of intent." She leaned over the console. "Can we triangulate its origin?" "Already did," Maris said, flicking the map wider. "It's coming from beyond Fogvale Island, near the shelf drop-off." She hesitated, then added, "Elias marked that region on one of his earliest charts. He called it the Hollow Sea." Aurora stiffened. "I remember. He believed something ancient lay buried there, a forgotten structure or a collapsed rift. He never found it, but he claimed the ley lines curved unnaturally near that site." Maris swallowed hard. "It's sending a signal now." The two women exchanged a glance. Then, without a word, they descended the tower together and stepped out onto the breakwater. The night was crisp, stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. The boys blinked rhythmically around them, but one far on the outer edge glowed a soft silver instead of green. Maris activated her portable receiver, tuning into the incoming frequency. The audio was haunting, 5 harmonic tones played in ascending order, like a chime echoing underwater. Then silence. Then it repeated. Aurora frowned. "That's not just a pulse. It's a melody." Maris's eyes widened. "You're right." She recorded the sequence and uploaded it to their transmitter console, using a software plugin to analyze its waveform. As the program decoded the harmonics, the tones formed a visual pattern spiraling inward like a vortex. In the center, a symbol emerged. Not letters. Not numbers. A sigil. "I've seen that," Aurora whispered, pale now. It was carved into the base of the original beacon stone. The one Elias had relocated when the new tower was built. He called it the mark of the deep signal. Maris tapped into the guild's archives, pulling up Elias Kingsley's old field notes. There, in an ink sketch, was the same sigil etched beside his caption, "Origin unknown." Possibly predating human settlement. Resonance response to direct light and harmonic input. Marked the entry to something unseen. A tense silence stretched between them. Maris turned to Aurora. "I think someone or something is trying to open a path again." By morning, the signal had intensified. Lieutenant Harper arrived before dawn, accompanied by 2 Navy sonar technicians and a linguistics analyst from the Guild. They gathered in the lower chamber, converting the transmitter room into an impromptu operations center. Screens lit up with sonar waves, signal strength graphs, and spectral visualizations of the sigil's waveform. One of the Navy techs, Lieutenant Das, adjusted his headset. The signal is originating from approximately 117 meters below sea level, just off Fog Vale's reef shelf. There's a narrow trench down there only recently detected by a side-scan sonar. It wasn't on charts 10 years ago. Maris leaned over his shoulder. Could it be a collapse? Possibly. Or something. Emerging, he said grimly. Aurora added, the ley line grid reacted to the signal. Our beacons are resonating differently now. Slight phase shifts, amplified harmonics. It's like whatever's out there is syncing with the system. Maris opened her encrypted journal and began writing. Day 92. The sea speaks. Not in waves or wind, but in patterns. In light and frequency. Something stirs beneath Fog Vale, and it knows we are listening. We were never alone. Stormwatch was never meant to stand alone. Lieutenant Harper reviewed the security logs. We'll need to send a team out, get visual confirmation of the source. We can deploy an ROV by this afternoon. Maris and Aurora nodded. We'll go with it, Maris said. If someone made contact before us, or if something's awakening now, we need to be there. By sunset, the launch was ready. On board were Maris, Aurora, Lieutenant Harper, and a remote operator guiding the ROV from the ship's console. The waters beyond Fog Vale Island shimmered unnaturally flat despite the breeze, as though listening. The ROV plunged into the sea with a hiss, its strobes flickering to life as it descended. Live footage displayed on monitors, layers of silted rock, then jagged coral cliffs. Finally, a chasm appeared, dark, narrow, rimmed with bioluminescent algae. Then, they saw it. Etched into the trench wall, half buried in stone, was a massive circular structure, covered in sigils identical to the one in the signal. A spiral of metal and obsidian, pulsing faintly. The ROV's instruments spiked. Energy signature is climbing, said the operator. Something's powering up. A tone issued from the structure, soft, melodic, familiar. Aurora whispered, it's answering us. The signal from Stormwatch beacon pulsed in return, its frequency syncing in real time. All around them, the sea trembled not violently, but rhythmically, like the beginning of a song only the earth remembered. Harper's voice cracked the silence. We need to decide, do we shut down the resonance, or let it continue? Maris looked at Aurora, then at the screen. She heard Elias's words echo in her mind, the beacon was never meant to keep things out. It was meant to guide them home. Her voice was clear. Steady. We let it continue. The pulse deepened. The spiral flared. Stormwatch had made contact. The sea's rhythmic pulse echoed faintly in Maris's bones as the ROV's feed continued to stream onto the ship's consoles. The spiral structure beneath Fog Vale's trench glowed brighter with every passing moment, its sigils pulsing in synchrony with Stormwatch Beacon's own rhythm. It was as if the ancient monument and the modern lighthouse had begun a conversation once spanning centuries and depths unreachable by ordinary eyes. Maris leaned in, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "It's alive," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the equipment. "Not alive like we are, but it responds. It's a consciousness tied to the ley lines." Aurora stood beside her, her jaw set with determination. "We're waking something vast, something forgotten." Lieutenant Harper cleared his throat, breaking the reverie. "We need a plan. If this awakening disrupts local currents or marine life, the harbor's safety could be compromised." Maris nodded, acknowledging the gravity. "We have to balance curiosity with caution." The Guild's linguistics analyst, Dr. Lila Reyes, adjusted her glasses as she examined the decoded signal patterns. "The melody they're emitting is structured like a language, mathematical, rhythmic, but with emotional undertones. It's almost welcoming." Maris swallowed. "Welcoming. So, it's inviting us to communicate." "Exactly, Dr. Reyes said. But we don't know what we're inviting in." Over the next 48 hours, Stormwatch Beacon became the nerve center of an unprecedented effort. Scientists, mariners, and Keeper Guild members converged, working in tandem to understand and engage with the entity beneath. Maris and Aurora led the charge, refining transmitter pulses, analyzing harmonic responses, and coordinating with the Coast Guard's sonar teams. They crafted a series of increasingly complex signal sequences, musical phrases layered with mathematical patterns and encoded messages of peace, stewardship, and unity. Each transmission was met with responsive pulses, their meanings unfolding like ripples in a vast ocean of understanding. Late one evening, as Maris stood on the beacon's balcony overlooking the moonlit waters, Aurora joined her silently. Together, they watched the resonance lights dance across the waves. Maris exhaled slowly. "Whatever this is, it's not just a relic. It's a guardian, or maybe a guide." Aurora smiled softly. "A beacon in its own right." Maris turned to her friend, eyes shining. "We were chosen to be its keepers." Aurora nodded. "And our journey has only just begun." Above them, the lighthouse cast its unwavering glow, a symbol of light bridging worlds seen and unseen. The morning fog curled around Port Avalon like a whisper, softening the edges of buildings and diffusing the rising sun into a pale glow. Maris felt the weight of the day ahead settle in her chest as she crossed the cobblestone square toward the town hall. Today was the emergency summit called by the Harbor Council, a gathering of local leaders, the Keepers Guild representatives, Coast Guard officials, and a handful of scientists flown in to assess the mysterious signals and the awakening beneath Fog Vale. Inside the chamber, voices hummed with tension. Councilman Elias Trent stood at the head of the table, eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. Marina Delacroix whispered with Lieutenant Harper near the side, and Dr. Lila Reyes reviewed data projections on a large screen. At the center of it all, Maris and Aurora prepared to address the room. Maris cleared her throat and began, "Friends and colleagues, the events unfolding beneath our waters are unprecedented. Our resonance network has established contact with an ancient entity, a guardian linked to the ley lines that cradle our coastline. This presence is not hostile, but its awakening carries risks and responsibilities we must face together." A murmur rippled through the room. Trent raised a hand for silence. "What kind of risks, MS?" "Ren. We've seen beacon sabotage, data theft, and now this, awakening. What assurances do we have that this entity will not endanger our port, our livelihoods?" Aurora stepped forward, voice steady. "The entity's responses are measured, harmonious. Our transmissions elicit signals of recognition and, we believe, an invitation to collaboration. We propose expanding our resonance array to encompass the broader ley network, creating a dialogue that balances human activity with the entity's needs." Harper added, "Our patrols will intensify, monitoring for environmental anomalies and unauthorized interference. The Coast Guard will implement emergency protocols in case of sudden changes in currents or wildlife behavior." Dr. Reyes displayed a spectral analysis of the recent signals. "These patterns suggest intelligence and purpose. Our task is to decode this communication, learn from it, and adapt accordingly." Trent leaned forward. "And if the entity demands we see certain operations? If it affects fishing zones, shipping lanes, or resource exploration?" Maris met his gaze. "Then we must weigh preservation with progress. This is a turning point for Port Avalon. We can choose to be stewards of both land and legacy or lose both." Council members exchanged looks. The room held its breath. Finally, Marina spoke. "I move we formalize a liaison committee composed of guild members, scientists, and harbor officials to oversee the integration of this new reality into our port's operations." Trent nodded slowly. "Seconded." The motion passed unanimously. Outside, as the summit adjourned, Maris and Aurora walked the harbor promenade beneath a sky smeared with twilight hues. The salty air was crisp, carrying the scent of brine and pine. They paused near the breakwater, gazing at the buoys blinking steadily in the encroaching darkness. Aurora sighed. "The council's support is a victory, but the real work begins now." Maris nodded. "We're not just keepers of a lighthouse anymore. We're ambassadors between worlds." The beacon's light swept over the waters, a steady pulse against the encroaching night. Somewhere beneath, the ancient guardian stirred, waiting for the next message in their unfolding dialogue. And as Port Avalon settled into the uneasy peace of twilight, Maris felt the weight of her role settle around her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a promise. The air hung heavy with salt and anticipation as Maris stood once more at the edge of the breakwater, eyes fixed on the darkening waters of Raven's Cove. Since the council's decision, the town had embraced its new role as guardian of the ley line resonance, yet Maris knew that beneath the surface, deeper mysteries awaited waiting to be uncovered. Understood, or perhaps awakened. Aurora joined her, a tablet in hand displaying live telemetry from the latest array of resonance buoys recently deployed near the trench at Fogvale Island. "The readings are stable," she said softly. "But there are subtle fluctuations, pulses coming from areas outside our grid. It's as if the entity is probing us, testing our resolve." Maris nodded, feeling the familiar thrill that came with the unknown. "It's reaching out. Waiting to see if we're ready to listen." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp ping from Aurora's tablet, a notification that a new, stronger signal had just been detected from the depths. They exchanged a determined glance. "Let's launch the deep-sea drone," Maris said. Hours later, aboard the research vessel Sea Star, Maris, Aurora, and a team of scientists watched as the sleek drone slipped silently beneath the waves. The deep-sea cameras illuminated a world both alien and ancient, towering coral formations shimmering with bioluminescence, vast fields of kelp swaying like underwater forests, and shadowy fissures opening into the abyss. Suddenly, the drone's sensors registered a massive structure partially buried in silt, a sprawling labyrinth of stone and metal, covered in intricate sigils that pulsed with faint blue light. The entity's architecture was unmistakable. It mirrored the sigils etched onto Stormwatch beacon, yet on a monumental scale. Maris's breath caught. "It's a gateway," Aurora added, "a passage between worlds, between the sea's depths and the land's surface." As the drone inched closer, a low harmonic vibration filled the vessel's hull, a resonant song, ancient and profound, vibrating through their very souls. The entity was alive, communicating in a language older than any spoken tongue. Dr. Lila Reyes, monitoring signal patterns, whispered, "It's inviting us in." Back on the vessel's bridge, Maris and Aurora prepared to send a carefully crafted harmonic sequence melding mathematical precision with the emotional cadence of human song. The transmission echoed through the deep waters, weaving a tapestry of light and sound. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, the labyrinth sigils glowed brighter, and the waters around the drone shimmered as if the very ocean itself was responding, welcoming, acknowledging. Maris smiled through tears. "We've crossed a threshold." Aurora grasped her hand. "And now, the true journey begins." The deep hum of the ocean seemed to seep into every fiber of Maris's being as she stood on the deck of the Sea Star, her eyes fixed on the monitor displaying the drone's live feed. The labyrinth beneath Fogvale Island had responded to their harmonic message, its sigils pulsing in a mesmerizing rhythm, an ancient code inviting dialogue. It was as if the very sea whispered forgotten secrets, waiting to be heard again. Aurora stood beside her, her gaze unwavering. "We've touched something vast," she said quietly. "Not just a structure, but a consciousness. One that has slumbered for millennia." Dr. Lila Reyes adjusted her headset, eyes scanning the incoming data streams. The patterns we're receiving resemble linguistic structures, but layered with emotions: hope, warning, curiosity. This isn't just contact, it's communion. Maris nodded slowly, the weight of responsibility settling firmly on her shoulders. Our next transmissions must be cautious but open-hearted. We're not just scientists or keepers anymore, we're ambassadors. As the drone hovered near an ornate archway carved with spiraling glyphs, a sudden burst of energy radiated from the structure. The ship's hull vibrated with low-frequency pulses that matched the resonance patterns of Stormwatch beacon. "Prepare to send the next sequence," Maris commanded. Aurora initiated the transmission, a complex blend of mathematical harmonics intertwined with the soothing tones of a sea shanty, honoring the fishermen and sailors of Port Avalon. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then, the labyrinth's glow intensified, and a new signal emerged, longer, more intricate, almost like a story unfolding through sound waves. "Dr." Reyes smiled in amazement. "They're telling us their history of storms weathered, ships guided, lives saved. The entity is the spirit of the sea itself, guardian of those who journey upon it." Maris closed her eyes, feeling the echoes of countless voyages, of courage and loss, wash over her. "We're part of something eternal." Aurora squeezed her hand. "Together, we'll ensure this legacy endures." As night enveloped Port Avalon, Stormwatch beacon cast its unwavering light across the dark waters, a beacon not just of safety, but of connection, understanding, and hope renewed. The wind whispered secrets as Maris and Aurora stood atop Stormwatch beacon, the lighthouse's steady beam cutting through the veil of night. The sea below churned softly, a dark mirror reflecting stars that seemed impossibly close. Since the awakening beneath Fog Veil Island, their lives had entwined with forces both ancient and unknowable. Maris traced her fingers along the cool brass railing, heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "The entity's messages, they feel like riddles wrapped in song." Aurora nodded, her gaze distant. "Legends speak of a threshold where the physical world brushes against the realm of spirits, where ley lines thin like fragile threads." Maris swallowed. "Are we standing at that threshold?" Before Aurora could answer, a faint glow emanated from the water, just beyond the breakwater. Soft, pulsing lights danced beneath the waves, swirling in patterns too deliberate to be natural. They flickered like underwater lanterns, beckoning. Without a word, the two descended the spiral staircase and hurried to the water's edge, where a small boat awaited, its oars carved with the same sigils that adorned the ancient labyrinth. As they pushed off, the water around them shimmered with bioluminescence, illuminating a path toward the glowing dance. The rhythm of the lights matched the heartbeat pulsing through Stormwatch's resonance network. Maris reached out, fingertips skimming the surface. The lights responded, spiraling upward like a chorus of will-o'-the-wisps. Aurora whispered, "They're guiding us." The boat drifted toward a submerged archway revealed by the lights, a gateway carved from coral and stone, entwined with silver threads that pulsed softly. As they passed beneath it, a gentle hum filled the air, and the world seemed to shift. Suddenly, Maris felt herself pulled between worlds, the physical and the ethereal. Visions flooded her mind, ancient mariners navigating by stars unseen, spirits singing beneath waves, a tapestry of light and shadow woven through time. Aurora's voice called out, grounding her. Maris, stay with me. They emerged into a hidden cove, where the sea glowed with otherworldly light and the air hummed with energy. Before them stood a figure neither fully human nor spirit, radiant with the very essence of the sea and sky. The figure spoke not with words, but through waves of feeling and melody that resonated deep within their souls. A message of balance, of respect, and of an eternal covenant between keepers of light and guardians of the depths. Maris and Aurora knelt, pledging their vows to protect the delicate veil that separated worlds, to honor the ancient wisdom, and to be the living bridge for generations to come. As dawn broke over Port Avalon, Stormwatch beacon shone brighter than ever, its light a promise, its heartbeat a song, and its keepers forever bound to the tides of destiny. The morning air hung heavy with salt and the promise of change as Maris stood beside Aurora on the weathered granite steps of Stormwatch beacon. The town of Port Avalon was waking slowly, unaware that the delicate balance between the seen and unseen was about to shift once more. In the days since their encounter beneath the veil, whispers of ancient forces had stirred in the deep, rippling through the ley lines and threading through the very fabric of the sea. Maris gazed out across the restless waters, where dark clouds gathered ominously on the horizon. The entity's song has grown louder, she murmured. I can feel it in the vibrations beneath my feet. Aurora nodded, her eyes sharp and steady. The resonance is intensifying. We must prepare. This isn't just a communication anymore, it's a summons. Lieutenant Harper approached, his expression grave as he handed them a weathered dossier. Storm patterns predict a tempest unlike any before, he said. The coastal defenses will be tested. We have to ensure the lighthouse and its network endure. Inside the transmitter chamber, the trio reviewed the latest seismic data and energy readings. The boys pulsed rhythmically, their signals weaving an intricate pattern that mirrored the swelling storm. Maris adjusted the transmitter's frequency, fine-tuning it to harmonize with the entity's pulse, while Aurora coordinated with the Coast Guard to reinforce patrols and safety measures. As the storm approached, the town rallied. Fishermen secured their vessels, children watched from windows, and the lighthouse keepers prepared for the onslaught. Through the night, the tempest unleashed its fury, wind howling like banshees, waves crashing with relentless force against the breakwater. Yet, within the beacon, Maris and Aurora maintained their vigil, sending harmonics into the storm's heart, their signals a lifeline of light and hope. Amid the chaos, a sudden surge pulsed through the ley lines, a call answered not just by the lighthouse but by unseen allies awakening across distant shores. The storm became a symphony of power, resilience, and unity, with Stormwatch beacon at its crescendo. As dawn broke over the battered coast, the town stood resilient. The lighthouse's light cut through the morning mist, a beacon renewed. Maris smiled wearily. We faced the storm and the storm listened. Aurora placed a hand on her shoulder. The journey continues. The tides of destiny are ever changing. Together, they watched as the sea calmed, knowing that the true test of their guardianship was only beginning. The calm after the tempest settled like a fragile promise over Port Avalon. Stormwatch beacon stood unwavering against the morning light, its beams slicing through lingering mists and casting a golden path across the waters. Yet beneath this serene facade, Maris felt a tremor, an unsettling shift reverberating through the ley lines that connected the lighthouse to the sea's ancient pulse. Inside the transmitter chamber, Maris and Aurora pored over the latest readings. The resonance data revealed an anomaly, a series of fluctuating harmonics diverging from the established pattern, originating from a newly discovered fissure deep beneath Fog Veil Island. Aurora traced the waveform on the display. The signal is fragmented, like a veil being pulled apart. Whatever lies beneath is restless. Maris nodded, fingers hovering over the control panel. We need to understand the source before it destabilizes the entire grid. Lieutenant Harper entered, urgency in his stride. The Coast Guard has reported unusual currents near the harbor entrance and unexpected marine activity, schools of fish avoiding their usual routes, and several sonar contacts behaving erratically. Dr. Lila Reyes, who had joined the team for an extended study, added, the ley lines disruption could be affecting the local ecosystem. If the veil between our world and the entity's domain weakens, it might allow energy and perhaps creatures from beyond to seep through. Maris exchanged a glance with Aurora. We must investigate the fissure and reinforce the resonance grid. The team prepared a deep-sea expedition, equipping the Sea Star with advanced submersibles and sensors capable of mapping magnetic and energetic fields with unprecedented precision. Maris and Aurora joined the descent, accompanied by Harper, Dr. Reyes, and sonar technician Rafael Torres. As the submersible plunged into the abyss, darkness swallowed the vessel. The external lights illuminated towering rock formations and swirling currents tinted with bioluminescent hues. Approaching the fissure, the instruments registered erratic energy spikes, pulses of raw, unfiltered power. Suddenly, the submersible's cameras captured movement, shapes weaving through the shadows. Silhouettes of creatures, neither wholly fish nor entirely spectral, flickered at the edge of perception. Aurora's voice crackled through the comms, steady despite the eerie surroundings. Maintain course. We're approaching the source. Maris peered at the screen, heart racing. The fissure opened into a vast cavern, walls lined with glowing crystals pulsating in sync with the resonance signals. At the cavern's center, a swirling vortex of energy spun, a shimmering portal bridging worlds. Dr. Reyes whispered, the veil is thinning. Back on the surface, the lighthouse's beacon pulsed in harmony with the cavern's energy. Maris and Aurora coordinated with the guild to amplify the resonance, stabilizing the portal's edges and preventing uncontrolled breaches. As hours passed, the team observed phenomena both wondrous and unsettling, fleeting glimpses of another realm, whispers carried on the currents, and visions of ancient mariners guiding spectral vessels safely through storms. Maris recorded in her journal. The veil unravels not with destruction, but with revelation. We are witnesses to a bridge between realities, keepers of its balance. The expedition's success brought relief but also solemn responsibility. The town prepared for a new era, one where Stormwatch Beacon was not just a guardian of ships, but a sentinel between worlds. Maris and Aurora stood once more on the lighthouse balcony, watching the first stars pierce the twilight. Aurora sighed softly. Our journey grows deeper. The sea's secrets are vast, and we are but humble keepers. Maris smiled, eyes reflecting the distant cosmos. Together, we'll face whatever comes from beyond the veil. And as the beacon's light wove its eternal path, the heartbeat of Raven's Cove pulsed stronger, an unbreakable bond between light, sea, and soul. The days following the veil's unsettling unraveling were filled with the restless energy that seemed to seep into every corner of Port Avalon. The townsfolk whispered of strange lights flickering beneath the waves, of voices carried on the wind that no one could quite place. Stormwatch Beacon, once a solitary sentinel, had become the heart of a growing mystery, one that entwined past, present, and the unseen realms beyond. Maris sat in the transmitter chamber, poring over the latest data streams. The resonance network was alive with new patterns, pulses interwoven with fragments of melody, like distant songs drifting through time. Her fingers danced across the console, tracing the delicate threads that connected the boys to the ancient ley lines, now vibrant with activity. Aurora entered quietly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of awe and concern. The signals are changing, she said softly. It's as if the entity is trying to communicate beyond patterns and pulses. Maris nodded. We need to listen differently. Not just with instruments, but with our senses. With our hearts. They spent hours decoding the melodies, uncovering a language built on harmonics and rhythm. Each sequence told a story, of storms weathered, ships guided, lives intertwined with the sea's endless embrace. The entity was sharing its history, a legacy of guardianship and hope. Lieutenant Harper arrived, bearing news from the Coast Guard. We've detected increased activity along shipping lanes, unexplained navigational aids appearing briefly, then fading. Mariners report feelings of calm in turbulent waters, as if an unseen hand steadies their course. Maris smiled, feeling the weight of their work ripple outward. The beacon's light is no longer just physical, it's spiritual, emotional. Aurora joined them at the console. We're at the threshold of a new era. One where humanity and the mysteries beneath the waves coexist in harmony. As night fell over Port Avalon, Stormwatch Beacon shone brighter than ever, a luminous bridge connecting worlds, a testament to the enduring power of connection and understanding. And in the depths below, the heartbeat of Raven's Cove sang on, a song of unity for all who dared to listen. The dawn broke over Port Avalon with a gentle glow, casting golden hues across the tranquil waters of Raven's Cove. Stormwatch Beacon stood proud against the horizon, its beam cutting a steadfast path through the morning mist, a symbol of hope, unity, and the unyielding spirit of its keepers. Maris and Aurora stood side by side on the lantern room's balcony, their eyes reflecting the endless sea and sky. Years of trials, mysteries, and revelations had woven them into the very fabric of the lighthouse's legacy. They had faced storms both natural and supernatural, bridged worlds seen and unseen, and forged a bond stronger than granite and salt. Aurora turned to Maris, a soft smile playing on her lips. We began this journey as keepers of light, but we became guardians of something far greater, the heartbeat of a world. Maris nodded, her heart full. The beacon is more than a tower. It is a living promise of guidance, resilience, and connection. Together, they watched as vessels navigated the shimmering waters, their courses steady beneath the lighthouse's unwavering glow. The resonance network pulsed softly, a quiet song threading through the ley lines and into the hearts of all who journeyed. As the sun climbed higher, casting its radiant light across the cove, Maris opened her leather-bound journal one last time. She began to write. In the light of Stormwatch beacon, we find our place not as masters of the sea, but as its humble stewards. May this eternal light guide all who seek safe passage, and may its heartbeat forever echo the courage and hope of those who keep watch. Aurora closed the journal gently, their shared journey complete yet ever unfolding. The lighthouse beam swept across the waters once more, a beacon eternal lighting the way for generations to come. Tuta. Stormwatch beacon, the heartbeat of Raven's Cove. Amotop. In the coastal town of Port Avalon, an ancient lighthouse stands sentinel over Raven's Cove, guarding secrets woven through time and tides. When Maris Wren and Aurora Kingsley discover an awakening beneath Fogvale Island, a mysterious entity connected to powerful ley lines, they embark on a journey to protect the Cove and bridge worlds both seen and unseen. As they unravel cryptic signals, face sabotage, and forge alliances with the Harbor Council and the Keepers Guild, these two keepers of light confront forces that challenge the very balance between nature and humanity. From deploying resonance buoys to communicating with the timeless consciousness beneath the waves, their story is one of courage, unity, and the eternal promise of guidance. Stormwatch Beacon, the heartbeat of Raven's Cove, is a captivating tale of ancient mysteries, modern innovation, and the unbreakable bond between light and sea, a journey that will keep you on the edge of your seat and inspire the guardian within us all.